now let's turn to this question of why aren't we the happiest creatures on the planet if we have so much creativity, so much innovation, incredible technologies, we can do anything we want, we can solve our problems. We should be happy 99.9% of the time. Why aren't we? This is the fundamental question that needs to be addressed. And one reason is partly because we are so good at doing things. We are so good at changing the world. We've seduced ourselves into the belief system that if we're not happy, then we need to do something about it. If we're feeling down, we need to go out and find something to do something. If we're feeling angry, we need to express it in some way. Some of these things are useful, but we've fallen into a belief system that says whenever you're not feeling good inside, then you need to change the world in some way. And really the core of that belief system says that our inner well-being, how we feel inside, depends upon what's happening outside. And that's true if there's some physical need. As I mentioned earlier, if there's a storm coming, we need to do something about it. If we're feeling hungry or cold, we need to do something about it. There are times when we do need to change the world. But most of the times that we're feeling unhappy is because maybe we've been criticized or something by somebody. Our sense of who we are is being criticized. We don't have to go and do something to rectify that. Or we could just be feeling a sense of lack or something, or a sense of sadness. But again, we don't have to do things. But our culture has said that we deal with these inner sense of something missing, an inner sense of lack, by going out and changing something in the world. And it's almost hypnotized into us from birth onwards. Not deliberately, it's just that's the way things are. I know that's the way my parents were. They were brought up in this idea that we need to do things, change things in order to be happy. It's in our education system, it's in the media. Almost everything is following this belief system that says in order to be happy, we have to get the world to be the right way. An interesting story with my own parents there. It was when I was, in my mid-20s, I was visiting my mother once. I'd just come back from wherever I was working and was visiting her at home. And as I was leaving, she was sort of just saying goodbye. I was about to get in the car. And she said, well, now you've got all these degrees, you've traveled to India, you've studied meditation, you've done all these things you wanted to do. Now don't you think it's a good time you got a job? And me still being in my reactionary phase, said, why? And she said, well, someday you want to, get a nice house, be able to go on vacation and get married. And she kept on coming up with good reasons why it would be good to get a job. And I kept on saying why, because I was still in my young reactionary phase. And finally she said, well, so that you can be happy, of course. And I said, well, aren't I happy? And there was this moment that came over her face where she said, well, yes, I suppose you are. It had never actually occurred to her. She said, well, yes, I suppose you are happy, yes. And that was the end of the conversation. In fact, whenever I visited home since then, she always says, as long as you're happy, that's the main thing. But that's just an example of part of our conditioning. It's like we need to have things, have possessions, have money, whatever it is, in order to be happy. And the truth is, really, whether or not we're happy is a question of how we see things, how we look at the world. And that is something which I think so many of the great spiritual traditions and philosophies have realized, that happiness does not lie in what we have or do. Unfortunately, though, it is so endemic in our culture, this idea that our inner well-being depends upon outer well-being. It's almost like it's been hypnotized into us. I came across some experiments which were done about 30 years ago now in Stanford on hypnosis, where they hypnotized a person and asked them to put their arm into a bucket of ice cold water, but they told the person it was just normal room temperature. And the person sitting there with their arm in ice cold water, and they said, how's it feel? I said, feels fine. Does it hurt? No. Whereas if you've ever been in ice cold water, it's actually painful. And so they were behaving all the right way, saying all the right things with this arm in freezing cold water. They then said, here's a pencil and paper. Without looking, let your other hand just write what it wants to write. And the other hand started writing, ouch, it's cold, stop the experiment, I don't like this. And this led to the idea that there's what's called a hidden observer, that actually the hidden observer knows the truth. But nevertheless, we keep responding the way that we expect, or the hypnotist expects us to behave. And I think it's very parallel in our society. We know deep inside, all of us, that just having more and more things doesn't actually make us any happier. I mean, when I say this, people, we all nod and agree. We know that. And yet we fall into the cultural hypnosis of following the advertising, following what other people are doing. We fall into that hypnosis even though we know deep inside it doesn't really work. And I think that's part of the awakening process, is to get more in touch with our inner knowing, with our inner truth. And that inner truth knows that really whether or not we're happy is a question of more about how we see things rather than what we have or what we do. But if we're in that hypnosis, then this is one of the reasons why we start consuming or keep consuming much more than we actually need. We end up with, some of us, with closetfuls of clothes that we don't actually need, but we seem to think it makes us happy. And I say seems to, that there is this feeling, if you go and buy a new jacket, for example, you think that buying the jacket has actually made you happy. That's the way it seems. But it actually isn't quite like that. If you look closely at what's happening, is you have some need, some sense of lack. You're missing something. But that is some sense of lack that's created in our mind, often by advertising. I mean, advertising knows how to make us feel there's something missing. If you look at just about every advertisement you ever see, there's the message, there's something you haven't got, whether it's a jacket or a new credit card, a vacation, something, new TV set. There's something you're missing. There's something you lack. And if you got this thing, you will feel better for it. That's the basic message. And of course, advertising has become very clever, very sophisticated at putting this message across. And so when we follow it and we go and buy whatever it is, in this case, say we buy a new jacket, we feel better. There's no doubt we feel better. And then we make the mistake of thinking the reason we feel better is because we got this new piece of clothing or whatever it is. But actually what has happened is we created a sense of something missing. We created for ourselves a sense of lack. And then when we got the jacket or whatever, that sense of lack disappeared. And that's why we feel better, because the sense of lack really was a self-created sense of discontent. And we buy the jacket, the discontent disappears and we feel okay again. But it's not the buying of something that makes us feel better. It's the wanting something that makes us feel bad. And then when we get it, we feel okay again. And one of the things I find sort of slightly humorous and ironical here is with the internet now, with internet shopping, this is really bringing this home. Because now we go shopping online and we look through all the different websites and we find the right product and the right size and the right color, the right price, everything. And finally, we push that button that says buy now. And that's when we feel okay. Whatever we're buying is still 3 days away by UPS. It hasn't arrived yet. We feel okay, not because we've got it, but when we say buy now, that sense of discontent has dissolved. It's actually the point at which we should feel more discontent because our credit card has been debited in advance of us receiving anything. But anyway, the point is we are creating discontent. We are creating lack. And our whole culture is based on this going out and fulfilling that lack. Is the belief that that's what's going to make us feel happier. That's why we consume so much more than we need. That's why we love money so much, because money gives us the opportunity to buy the things, the products, the friendships, the opportunities, whatever we think is going to make us happy. And so we end up in what Indian traditions call samsara. The word samsara means literally to wander on without end, to keep on wandering on from one thing to another to another. And so we wander on from one temporary satisfaction to another temporary satisfaction to another temporary satisfaction, almost like we're addicted. With an addict who's chemically addicted, there's a good period, the fix wears off, you go off in search of another addiction, whatever it is, that wears off, you go off in search of another one. We're sort of addicted to this material culture. We're addicted to things, to opportunities, experiences, all founded on this belief that if only we could find enough of the right things, we'd finally be happy. And yet the truth is, and I think this is what our culture is waking up to at this time in history, is that doesn't work. Well, it works up to a certain degree. We need to have our basic needs, our basic human needs, comforts. We need to have those met. But beyond a certain level, continually chasing after more and more only actually serves just to make us more and more discontent and consume more and more, and in the end damage the planet more and more. One thing I'd just like to make clear here, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have things, enjoy possessions, we shouldn't enjoy the world. I'm not suggesting that we should give up everything. I'm not saying we should go and live in a cave as poor people. Not that at all. We are here to enjoy life, and in many different ways. The point I want to make here is that to notice when we don't have something, when we are feeling something's missing, or there's something we want to avoid, when the world doesn't feel quite under control the way we'd like it to be, to notice what that does to our minds, really to notice how we create dissatisfaction, we create discontent for ourselves, sometimes when it's not necessary. And that's the important thing, to realize that we are creating dissatisfaction, discontent. And when we can let go of that discontent, when we can stop creating it for ourselves, then we can naturally return to a state of feeling okay. We don't have to have the world be the right way in order to feel okay and content in ourselves.